Hi and welcome to this new video. I'm particularly happy to see you for this one. Not saying that I'm not happy to see you for the others, but this one is going to be super interesting for you. Why? Well, because you will discover a real-world project that we use daily at Astronomer. Indeed, we have a data pipeline that runs daily in order to identify posts on Reddit, for now, that mention Airflow or Astronomer so we can respond to them. But let me show you that in action. This is the data pipeline that we use to identify Reddit posts that we might want to respond to. So first, we have this task that creates a table in our data warehouse, Snowflake, and then we fetch the Reddit posts. Then we check if we have posts. If not, then the data pipeline stops here. Otherwise, we categorize those posts using the LLM because we might have different categories for the posts like general or troubleshooting or Airflow and so on. So different categories, you will see that later. And we filter the posts to keep only the posts that we think the DevRel team should respond to. Because again, if you have a very specific issue with your very specific environment, obviously the DevRel team won't be able to help you with that. Next, we send Slack notifications to tell the team that those posts are mentioning Airflow or Astronomer, and so we might want to answer them. And in parallel, we store those posts in the data warehouse, and finally, we have some statistics, metrics regarding the posts that we have just filtered. On Slack, it looks like that. So for example, here we have two Reddit posts. The first one has a medium priority. I will come back at that in a second. But you can see that for each post that we flag as an interesting post for us, we have the category. So in that case, general question, and then the subreddit, which is data engineering, the title, the link to the Reddit post, the body, so the content of that post, the score, how many comments, and finally the reasoning. So why the LLM decided to flag this post as an interesting one. Now we have two priorities. I mean, actually three, but most of the time it's always medium or high. So the medium priority is a post that the DevRel team might want to respond, but it's not like, it might not be exactly what we want to respond. Okay, let's put it that way. However, whenever we see a high priority, that is truly what we want to respond. So for example, why Airflow? What is Airflow? Should I use Airflow for that? And so on. Okay, you will learn more about that in the prompt that we designed later in this video. Okay, so you have a full picture of the project, and now it is time for you to create the exact same one. Let's dive into it. You can follow this video regardless of the setup you use. So if you have an Airflow local instance running with the Astro CLI or the official Docker Compose file, this is fine. In my case, I'm going to use the Astro IDE, which is available for free. If you create a trial account on Astro, you will get access to the Astro IDE. It is a cloud IDE, which is specifically designed to build Airflow data pipelines. It is much better than if you use Claude or ChatGPT 5 and so on. So that's why I'm going to go with that solution. But again, regardless of what you pick, you will be able to follow that video. So now let's begin. All right, the first step, if you are using the Astro IDE, is to create a project. If you are already running Airflow in local, then you don't have to do anything here. But let's create a project. So for that, we can click on Learn Airflow Data Orchestration, and then that will create a project that we are not going to use. Instead, let's go back to Astro IDE, and then click on plus project. From here, we can give a name to the project. So let's say Reddit mentions DAG. And then for the description, this pipeline identifies Reddit posts mentioning Airflow or Astronomer. And then we can pick the visibility. So for now, we're going to stick to private, and a template we want to start from scratch. So let's stick to none. Create project. And as soon as we do that, we have this beautiful project. On the left, we have a chat from which we can interact with the Astro AI to help us writing Airflow data pipelines following best practices. And obviously this AI is aware of the environment that we have on Astro, which is pretty nice if you have connections and so on. And then on the right, we have pretty much what you will get on your Visual Studio Code editor, or if you are using any other IDE. So you can see here we have some files and folders already created for us. Again, if you are using Docker Compose, you may not have exactly the same structure, but as long as you have the folder tags, you should be fine. And then you will see later that we can test the code directly on Astro, which is pretty cool. But for now, we have everything to start creating the pipeline. And by the way, you will find all the code that I will show you in that video in the link in the description below. Alright, so first step, we need to install some Python dependencies. So for that, you open the requirements.txt file. If you don't have it and you are using the official Airflow Docker image, you can modify the following variable as described right here, so you can install the libraries that you need. Otherwise, you can run pip commands directly in the Docker file as well. Those are the 4 Python packages that we need to install. First, the provider for Snowflake, so we can interact with Snowflake from our data pipeline, then the provider Slack to send Slack notifications, Pro in order to fetch the Reddit posts, and last but not least, the Airflow AI SDK. If you don't know this Python package, it's amazing whenever you want to use AI in your Airflow pipelines. As you can see, we will use OpenAI, but feel free to use Anthropic, Gemini, and so on. Look at the Airflow AI SDK documentation to learn more about that. So now we have the Python packages. The next step is to create a Reddit API key so we can fetch the Reddit posts. For that, you need to go to the following URL, and then you will find under developed applications, create another app. You click on that button, and here you give a name to your app, whatever you want. You pick script, then a description, a URL, it doesn't matter that much, and then you create the app. Once you create the app, you will see something like that. You have the name of the app, and here is the client ID of your app. Then if you click on edit, you will see the secret key that you also need to use so that you can fetch Reddit posts. Then you go on the Airflow UI, admin, connections, add connection, and then for the connection ID, it's Reddit API. The connection type is generic, and you expand extra fields JSON, and here you put client ID equals to the client ID that we just saw, and client secret, and you put the secret that you have generated. And finally, you click save. If you are on Astro, you can go to environment and then connections, and you click connection. From there, you select generic for the type, and you put the same connection ID, Reddit API, then the type is HTTP, and here in the extra, you put the client ID and the client secret. Last but not least, you have this option that you must turn on in order to automatically link that connection to all deployments, because later we will create an ephemeral deployment just to verify that the DAG works or not, and we want to automatically link that connection to this ephemeral deployment. So once you have this connection, you should be able to see here Reddit API with the same values as me, HTTP, all deployments, and so on. Back to the code editor, let's create the DAG. And for that, I'm not gonna do it manually because I don't know about you, but I'm a bit tired of creating the same DAG again and again with the same parameters and so on. So in that case, I'm gonna use the Astro AI, but feel free to copy and paste the code that you will find in the description below. So here I'm gonna say, I want to create a DAG that runs hourly with the start date January 1st, 2025, and the tags Reddit, social media, and analytics, because it's always a best practice to have tags to filter your DAGs. And that's it. So with that, I can just hit enter and wait a little bit. All right, so you can see that the DAG has been generated. Let's take a look at it. So we have the Reddit analytics DAG and all that code, which looks okay. We're gonna change a few things though. So let's accept the changes. And now we're gonna change Airflow decorators by Airflow SDK. Okay, this is the new import starting from Airflow 3. And we're gonna rename the DAG to Reddit mentions. Okay, so let's do that here, and let's do the same for the name of the DAG file. Otherwise, I do have the tags, the start date, the schedule, the catch up, and we use the decorators, which is amazing. All right, let's add the first task. This task creates a table in our data warehouse, Snowflake, where we will store the posts that mention Astronomer or Airflow. And this is the task. So you can see here we are using the SQL execute query operator, so we have to import it at the top of the DAG file, right here. And then we need to remove this because example task does not exist anymore. By the way, I want live code, otherwise the video will be way too long. So if you want to copy and paste the code, you can do that. You will find everything you need in the link in the description below. As we use the SQL execute query operator, we need to create the corresponding SQL query. So let's do that. In the include folder, we can create a new folder called Reddit. And then in that folder, we create this file. And then we put the following SQL request in it. So nothing crazy here. We just create a table, Reddit mentions, with the following columns. Notice that we use if not exists to create the table. Indeed, as this task will run multiple times, if we don't use if not exist, then you will get an error saying that this table already exists. So it's a good thing to remember. So once we have that, the next step is to create the Snowflake connection. Obviously, you need to have a Snowflake account, which you can create for free, pretty nice. And then as soon as you have that, you will be able to create your connection, but make sure that you have installed the Snowflake provider on your Airflow instance. Otherwise, you won't be able to see the Snowflake connection type when you create the connection on the Airflow UI. If you're on Astro, then you go to Environment and then Connections. From here, you can create a connection. You look for Snowflake, and then you pick username and password. And from there, you can define the connection ID snowflake_edu, and then the username, the account, the password. And if you click on more options, you have the database, the region, the warehouse, and everything you need in order to connect to Snowflake from your data pipeline. Okay, so make sure that you have all of that ready and turn on this toggle so it is automatically linked to your ephemeral deployment that you will create later. And again, same thing if you are on Airflow only. All right, so let's go back to the Astro IDE or your code editor. Once we have that, the next step is to add a default arguments here, as we want to ensure that the SQL execute query operator, and we will have multiple SQL execute query operators, use the same connection ID that we just created. So con_ID, and here it is Snowflake edu. Okay, so make sure that you have that, and automatically the SQL execute query operator uses this connection ID. So from there, we can already verify that what we've done so far works. If you're running Airflow on the official Airflow Docker image, what you can do is to open the scheduler and then go to exec, then type /bin/bash, and from here you will have access to the Airflow CLI. Using the Airflow CLI, you can test your tasks, and I always recommend you to do that. It's pretty simple. You just need to type Airflow tasks test, and then if you look at the options, you just need to pass the DAG ID of the DAG, where the task you want to test is, and the task ID of the task you want to test, as well as a logical date. So concretely, you will do something like that: Airflow tasks test, and then Reddit mentions, then create Reddit mentions table, and finally a date in the past. So let's say January 1st, 2025. If you hit enter, you will be able to verify that the task works or not. On the Astro IDE, it is different. As you can see here, you have another tab, test. If you click on it, you can see no test deployment is running, so you need to start a test deployment, then wait a few minutes until the deployment is up and running, and we get our beautiful task, create Reddit mentions table. If we look at the test output, if we don't have any import errors, that's great. That means we haven't made any mistakes in the DAG. So let's click on run right here to verify that the task works or not. Let's see in the task logs. And unfortunately, the task fails. Why? Well, if you look at the logs, you can see we have an issue regarding the file that we cannot import. Actually, it is not found. So to fix that error, it's pretty simple. You go back to your code, and here after catch-up, for example, you add the parameter template search path equals to the following string. That tells to Airflow where to find the SQL file create Reddit mentions table, as it is in the include folder and then in the Reddit folder. As you can see, by default, it looks at this search path, so that's why we are adding this one. All right, so let's verify that it works. For that, we can click on sync to test. And for you, if you are using Airflow locally, then you can just run the command Airflow tasks test again. Now let's wait a few seconds. If we click on run again and wait a little bit, we can see that we have successfully created the table in Snowflake. Okay, so now we have created the first task. Let's move on to the second one, which is fetch Reddit posts. The first step is obviously to create the task. And for that, we use the task decorator. Remember that behind the scene, this is the Python operator. This task returns a list of dictionaries, and you will see why in a second. Then we fetch the Reddit API credentials, the client ID, the client secret and we define a user agent, you can see that we fetch the API credentials by using the base hook.getConnection. So that allows us to fetch a connection that we created earlier, Reddit API in that case. So whenever you need to fetch a connection, you can use base hook like that. And if you wonder what is a hook, I strongly recommend you to take a look at the Airflow documentation. It's a very important concept to know. Then once we have the Reddit API credentials, the next step is to create a Reddit client. And for that, we use Pro, which is the library we installed earlier. And we pass the client ID, the client secret, the user agent, and also we set this parameter to false. Once we have the Reddit client, we can move forward. And now we just need to specify that this client will be read-only, as we don't need to write anything on Reddit, right? We just want to fetch posts and that's it. Then we create a list of all posts that will contain, well, all posts. And finally, the search queries, so all terms that we want to look for in Reddit posts. So in that case, Airflow, Astronomer, but also Astro and data observability. Once we have those queries, the next step is to loop over those queries. So that's exactly what we are doing right here. We create a loop over those queries. And then for each query, for each term, we search for the Reddit posts in the subreddit data engineering. You can see that we have the query here corresponding to, for example, here Airflow, but then Astronomer and so on. We sort by new posts. The time filter is hour. So we want the new posts in the last hour and we limit that to 100 because we don't want to have too many posts at once. Then once we get the results, we need to loop over those results. This one is a little bit longer, but pretty easy. What we do basically is that we extract the information that we need for every post. So the ID, the title, the author, and so on. And then we store each post in the all posts list. Because a post can contain multiple queries, so multiple terms that we look for example, Astro and Astronomer in the same post, we need to ensure that every post we add in the all posts list is unique. So that's why we do that. And then we add some debug information on the standard output and we return the unique posts. Then last but not least, if we get an exception in everything we do here, then we log the error and we return an empty list. As we are having some warnings and errors, let's fix all of them. So we need to create this logger object at the top. So right here, we can import a login and then we create the object here. Next, we must import the following types as well as pro, like that, and the base hook that we can import with the following line. Now we have created fetch Reddit posts. The next step is to verify that we do have posts with check posts, and if not, then we will run this task, otherwise this one to categorize the posts. So let's implement those tasks. Let's begin with the branch task. As we want to use the branch Python operator, we can use the @task branch decorator, as you can see right here. Then we define the task check posts that takes multiple posts, as you can see here with the list of dictionaries. So dictionary is a post. And then this task returns a string corresponding to the task ID of the next task to execute. In that case, if we have some posts, then we want to execute the tasks with the task ID categorize mention. Otherwise, we want to execute the task with no posts to process. We can create that task, which is pretty easy because this task does nothing else than printing this message on the standard output. And now we have to create the task categorize mention, but this one is definitely more interesting. Indeed, the goal of this task is to categorize a Reddit post to determine if DevRel should respond. And for that, we're gonna use AI. But whenever you need to use AI in your Airflow DAGs, I recommend you to take a look at the Airflow AI SDK. So this is an open source project, and as you can see, as soon as you install it, you will have access to some decorators such as the add task LLM, agent, LLM branch. If you want to add AI in your branch tasks, you can do that, and so on. So truly, it is the easiest way to integrate AI in your Airflow DAGs. I recommend you to take a look at it. But that's exactly what we're going to use right now for this task. As we want to interact with the LLM, we use the LLM decorator, as you can see right here. And then we specify the model that we want to use, GPT-5, but you can use another model if you want, like Anthropic or Gemini. And then we specify the output type that this model produces, in that case, a dictionary. and then we define how many task instances of that task we want. Here, 1 task instance per DAG run. And this is a best practice whenever you have a task that consumes a lot of resources or interacts with an API or an external system. Be careful, because if you have multiple task instances of your task running at the same time, you may overload the API or the system that you interact with. So this is a best practice, and that's why we set it to 1. Then we define the system prompt. And this is important because that's the guidelines, the instructions that we pass to the LLM to correctly categorize the Reddit post. Then last but not least, we create the task, so categorize mention, that takes a post, as we can see right here, that returns a string. And then here is the content of the task. We combine the title and the content of the post as a single string that we return, and that feeds the LLM. And that's how the LLM decides if that post should be categorized as a post that the DevRel team should respond. And just like that, you have a task that interacts with the LLM, and so you can take smart decisions, which is pretty amazing, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but this is super easy to integrate any LLM in your Airflow DAGs using the Airflow AI SDK. However, we are not done yet. We still need to create the system prompt. So let's do that in the include folder, and then in the Reddit folder, let's create a new file that we're going to call DevRel categorization prompt.py. And in that file, we can have the following system prompt variable with this value. So feel free to take a pause here if you want to read the system prompt. We are basically asking for the LLM to categorize a post as a post that the DevRel team should respond. Whenever the post is asking why Apache Airflow, what does Airflow do, when to use Airflow, and so on. And then we tell the LLM what it should return. In that case, a JSON object with should respond, category, priority, and the reasoning why the LLM decided to categorize that post as an interesting one. Also, don't forget to add the following import at the top of the DAG file. Alright, so let's take a look at the DAG. If you go on the Airflow UI and look at it, you will see only one task, create Reddit mention stable. Why? Well, because remember that we are using the task decorator. And so whenever you use the task decorator, you actually have to explicitly call those tasks. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to define the dependencies and call them. So just after the last task that you created, let's define the dependencies. So first, we're going to create a new variable posts that gets the posts from the task fetch Reddit posts. Then we create another variable branch that takes check posts, okay, which is the branching task. Then no posts equals to no posts to process. And finally, we can create another variable, which is categorizations equals to categorize mention. And here we use expand and we pass posts equals to posts. And we need to put that list here as well. And by the way, if you don't know what expand is, I strongly recommend you to look at the Airflow documentation about dynamic task mapping. But the idea here is that for every post that we have in this list, we create a task instance of categorize mention. That's why we set this parameter here to 1. It's because we will end up with many categorize mention task instances, because we can end up with many posts and we don't want to have all of them running at the same time as we interact with a LLM. Okay, so let's verify that everything works. So I'm going to sync to test and wait a little bit. For you, if you are on Airflow directly, you can just restart your Airflow instance or wait a little bit. And then you will see the following dependencies, which are not completely correct. So let's modify the dependencies again. So at the bottom of the DAG file, we can add the following dependencies. So first we want to run create Reddit mention stable. Then we want the posts, then the branch. Then we want to pick between categorizations and no posts. Okay, so now let's verify the dependencies and we can see that they are much better. So first we execute create Reddit mention stable, then fetch Reddit posts, then check posts. If we do not have posts, then no post to process will be executed. Otherwise, categorize mention. And you can see that categorize mention produces multiple tasks because we have this graphic effect. All right, so at this point we have successfully implemented check post, no posts, and categorize posts. So let's take a look at the next tasks to implement. The idea of this task is to filter the posts so we only keep the posts that we should respond, but also with a medium or high priority. So let's do it. At the bottom of the DAG, we create a new task that we call filter DevRel posts that takes two parameters, the posts and the categorizations that come from this task, and we return a list of posts. Then we create a DevRel posts variable that contains the posts that we must respond. Then we create a loop. So we're going to loop over both the posts and the categorizations. So for each post, we have the corresponding categorization. In that loop, we verify that we should respond to a given post. If yes, then we add the following properties to the post. So category, priority, and reasoning. Also, we want to respond to posts that have a medium or high priority, and that's exactly what we are doing here. And we add the post in the DevRel posts variable. Once we have that, we can just verify that we do have posts. If not, we're going to raise an Airflow skip exception that will skip that task and show any downstream tasks to this one. And last but not least, we return the DevRel posts. So obviously we have to import the Airflow skip exception right here. So let's do that. At the top of the file, we can type from Airflow exceptions, and then we import the Airflow skip exception. Pretty easy, right? I mean, nothing crazy in that task. It's just a way to filter the posts that we actually want to respond. Then last but not least, we need to define the dependencies. So after categorizations, we can add this dependency. And if you save the file and look at the Airflow UI, you should be able to see this amazing data pipeline with the last task, filter DevRel posts. All right, so at this point, we are able to filter only the Reddit posts that we want to respond. Now, the next step is to create the send Slack notification task so that whenever there is a post that we want to respond, we receive a Slack notification and we can just click on that notification and land on the corresponding post. So let's do it. At this point, if you want to implement that task, you will need to have a Slack account and a Slack workspace. Then you can just go to the following URL and you will need to create a new app. As you can see, I've already created one, which is the EDU bot. If we take a look at that app, what you absolutely need to do is to go to incoming webhooks and then make sure that you create a new webhook where you will get this webhook URL that you will need to copy and use in your Airflow instance, and also specify the Slack channel in which you want to receive your Slack notifications. With that, the next step is to create the Airflow connection so that you can interact with Slack from your data pipeline. If you're on Astro, you can go to environment and then connections and click on add connection. From there, you select generic, and then the connection ID will be Slack community support, and then the type will be HTTP. For the host, you need to put this that comes from the webhook URL, and then for the password, you need to put the rest of the webhook URL. As soon as you do that, you click on save and you have successfully created your connection. You can do the same thing on the Airflow UI. All right, so this is the task we need to create, and as it is a quite long task, feel free to take a look at the code in the description below. But just let me give you a quick explanation about it. First, this is the name of the task, send Slack notifications, that takes one parameter, filtered posts, that again we get from the previous task, filter DevRel posts. And this task returns nothing because we just want to send Slack notifications. Then we use the Slack webhook in order to connect to Slack. And you can see here that we use the connection Slack community support. So make sure that you have created that connection. And also you need to import the Slack webhook at the top of the DAG, as you can see right here. Once you have the Slack connection, you can just loop over the posts and then fetch the priority and do some formatting. You know, if the priority is high, then we want to have this emoji. Otherwise, we want to have this emoji. And then you can just truncate the body text if it is too long for the corresponding Reddit post. And we create some blocks, so some Slack blocks that will pretty much format our Slack notification. You can see here that we use this, which looks a bit weird, but it's very interesting. That helps us to tag the DevRel team. Okay, so that's what it is. And again, feel free to take a look at the code. I won't explain everything here, but we just put whatever we find interesting for us in the Slack notification. And as soon as everything is good, we're going to send it with Slack hook.send. And then we put the text message as well as the blocks. And if for some reason we got an exception, then we will raise this error and we will print it on the standard output. Okay, so now we have this task. The last step is to define the dependency at the bottom of the DAG. So let's do it right here. We can just put filtered post. And if you save the file and take a look at the Airflow UI, you should be able to see the following data pipeline with the last task, send Slack notifications. All right, so that's it for this project. Honestly, I won't cover the rest of the tasks because this is more related to SQL. It's just running SQL queries, but feel free to ask if you have any questions regarding those tasks. Basically, we interact with Snowflake, but at this point, we have successfully implemented a data pipeline that identifies Reddit posts that the DevRel team should respond. And again, this is exactly what we are using in production at Astronomer. Now let's verify that everything works. So if you're on Astro, you can just click on one task at a time with the run, but this is interesting if you want to test a specific task. In our case, we actually want to run everything, so we can click on run DAG. So let's do it, and hopefully everything will work. So let's take a few seconds. So you can see that the first task is running and got successfully executed. Then the second one as well. Good. Let's verify that we do have posts. It looks like we do not, so that's why all the tasks have been skipped. But in the case we have Reddit posts, we should be able to see some Slack notifications that we can see right here. Okay, so that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, it's a real world project that we currently use. Feel free to let me know what you think in the comment below, but I can already tell you that there is a lot of things that we can do to improve the code of the data pipeline, and you will see that in another video. Thank you so much and take care.